Welcome to a new class. Today we are going to take this opportunity to focus on the question of how to configure OMniLeads in order to set up a trunk using SIP against a provider of SIP trunks, which will allow us to access the PSTN. From the example that gives us the command initenv that we were seeing in all the previous classes. In the same example, he configures a zip trunk only that well in the part of resolution of uses an IP that, is prepared. Better fact, a host name that is prepared for the world containers and Docker desktop. But more or less, we already have enough data. Regarding the parameters involved in the declaration of a zip trunk. For starters, the syntax that you're going to see here in the configuration is inherent to what is PJSIP wizard. Yes, which is a form that raises asterisks. We put the PJSIP wizard, PJ pure zip way to configure that was far away at the time from what is the traditional asterisk chan zip that was being used. Historically speaking, then came out with this possibility. This, for example, is traditional PJC, where the declaration of a trunk involved playing different files and learning different parameters for each type of file. And in this question of PJC wizard, the asterisk people come out with a much simpler way of writing the configuration, where in a single file we are going to allude to the different types of parameters. So simply is to study a little bit the parameters. As always in asterisk, everything is very well documented. And in this parameterization, you are going to find this parameterization is the one that is going to be used in the declaration of trunks of the PJC type of asterisk. Chance is really there, but it is no longer recommended to use it. It is being discontinued to asterisk 20 onwards. So I'm going to focus 100% on PJC of the most important parameters we should be taking into account if we accept registration and accept authentication. And send registration. Authentication. This is going to define, the type of trunk. Generally, when we're in a SIP trunk environment where you contract a SIP trunk to these providers, which there are several, that offer termination in different countries, usually the incoming calls are not authenticated. Those kind of providers do not send a zip authentication. When they send us a call, then we not do an authentication in the zip layer, simply with the cloud firewall as we saw. And from declaring here in the remote host of this zip trunk, for example, in my case, and making use of an example trunk only, it is not a real trunk feet 100, but it is an emulator. But here I am already declaring the remote host, so I am already somehow making one. Beyond the cloud firewall, I am also limiting to attend SIP requests, even though I'm not going to authenticate them. But they come from this IP, so the incoming calls sent to us by the carrier are generally not authenticated. The outgoing calls are. And also many times we have to send a registration when our IP is not fixed, public fixed, or when the carrier implies that our configuration includes a registration, one registers at the zip level. That's why this parameter is in. That's why this parameter is in the zip level. Zip. That's why this parameter is included. And also in every call, there is a digest where between the two zip pairs, for example, our OMniLeads and the end of the zip trunk, create a challenge, for instance, to authenticate. So these four parameters are very important keep in mind what each one is for, and also are related to this other part, outbound off and inbound off. I have not even declared the inbound out because I have already said that I'm not going to authenticate. If I had put here, yes and yes, well, I would have to also put it here, maybe in the part of trunking against a PBX. We will see it. Well, then we have this, as I say, parameters that, well, I recommend. Go to the source, go. Here to what is the configuration of asterisks. For example, symmetric. This has to do with when there is NAT in between. This can also be searched as well as PJSIP. And well, let's always see documentation for each of these parameters. Obviously, I don't remember them off the top of my head. The force report. Well, they have to do also with the art. On which zip is based. What to do. When there are NAT problems, these parameters help. Here's the codec part. What codecs are we going to allow for this trunk? If you wanted to grab G, you would have to, for example, put G or Opus. The TMF with which are going to exchange the TMF ones for this trunk. Then we have, this is very important, the context. Don't touch it. If it's a trunk against the PSTN, goes from PSTN. Then we have to put the port, even if it is the 5060, the same to 5060. This is the end with which we are going to trunk, and the user of the password. So in my case, I have my trunk like this. What I can do to see if this is registered, if it's all right, is to access the asterisk clip. And here I can do a PJSIP show endpoint, and it's going to show my trunk. If it's unavailable at the moment, this is going to send some packets to hurry the process along. I can do this. Well, there it is. There it already did. Sent. Some option, surely. There was response. So my trunk is available. My suitcase is available. Additionally, we have the outbound routes, the outgoing routes. We have one created. Of example, that precisely uses the trunk also that was created. Therefore here, in the part of outgoing routes, I have the name, the ring time, the amount of time that will try to make a ringing. We also need to give importance to the pattern part. If we are going to add, if we have to add to the dialed number, if we have to add some header, or if we're going to dial with some header that is going to be removed at the time of sending the numbering. This is, well, basic rules. If you come from the PBX world, you will understand it well enough. If not, you can dig deeper into our documentation. I will not dwell too long on this because the course is more oriented to the part of the management and to put on of the management of deploys. But well, yes, more or less, consider that one could work with routing rules, be quite zealous. What is recommended? This is just not what is recommended. The important thing here is to define the number of, that is to match the regular expression, the pattern, with the numbers that are actually going to be dialed in this instance. There was a time that I calculate that this is still working, or is still operational. But there are many times hacks too. This type of SIP devices, SIP servers, in which then seek to place international calls. Therefore, a good layer of security implies that here we are quite accurate with the digits. X means any digit from 0 to 9, then we have N, then we have ZZ is 1 to 9, N is 2 to 9. But mainly we can limit this to the numbering that we are going to be marking to the countries that we are going to be marking. And here, well, you can also work with a prefix. If, then I put 123 minus 456 minus 7,899 digits. Only 9 digits are going to march in this pattern, and they are going to make this call that has 9 digits on the trunk that I just modified myself that created me by default. The environment initializer that I modified to go against an IP address of an emulator. And also now I limited the dialing to 9 digit. So with my agent, disk, a call, nine digit, and let's look a little bit at the asterisks. Click. The call is generated by my trunk. Attended. Attended. But if I suddenly dial a call that has more or less digits, I should encounter a non-dial plan error. Yes, of course, there is no dial plan for this. So, by the way I'm going, you guys can go see some commands that Docker, and let's see, for example, we see that one call placed it and the other registered it in Postgres as non-dial plan, which was the one I tried to dial with more than 9 digits. So this way we can also see how secure our platform. Yes, what I just did then is set up a zip trunk. Rather than setting up a zip trunk from scratch, what I went around doing is based on the one that generated me the command. Note that in this particular version of OMniLeads is the 5060 port of asterisk, which trunks against the end of the provider, right? So the provider should send me to the 5060 port. I mention this because in the earlier versions of OMniLeads after, in version 1X, the port 5160 was used, if I remember correctly, which had, well, quite a few criticisms since most of our community stated having that particular restriction. That many times the providers, the carriers, ask for the 5060 port. For that reason, to communicate OMniLeads to the SIP world to the outside, now we are using the 5060 port. Then can be given other types of configuration. For example, we could be talking about a trunk where here are some templates that can facilitate the work a little bit. For example, this one that says dedicated SIP trunk has more to do with the fact of a zip trunk where this in our OMniLeads and the end are authenticated directly by IP addresses. That is, this has a fixed IP address and the provider also, and the provider doesn't require me that I send an authentication at the zip level. This has a fixed IP address, and the provider also, and the provider does not require that I send a authentication at the zip level, therefore does not require me to authenticate him either. So for example, in this template, we're going to see that we don't accept registration or authentication. We also don't send registration or authentication. And just here we put the IP and the trunk end port. So, well, this is somewhat generic. Then everyone should delve deeper into PJSIP knowledge. This should fall into 90% of the cases. Either an internet trunk where you have to send authentication and registration, or a dedicated SIP trunk where authenticate both peers per IP address